The following video interview is part of the USMC VTA History Project, and we're recording at the VTA reunion in Washington D.C. October 30th, 2015.
Okay, my name is Joeseph Liu, L-I-U. It's a Chinese name if you haven't really paid attention, but I was with Charlie Company First Tanks in December 66 to December 67.
Okay.
And we were at Marble Mountain at first, and then we moved to Hoi An within a month after I got there. And so my position of with the company was a company unit diary clerk, and I'm an 0141 trained administrative man, and also kind of unique. I wanted to train as a crewman for a flame tank as well, and so I OJT tried to learn how to be a crewman so I don't have to spend all my time in the office. So it's kind of crazy, but we did that, and then I ended up. When I left Vietnam, I got a meritorious combat promotion to Sergeant E5. And then I was like 22 months in the Marine Corps at the time. And so that's one of my things I was proud of, that we served the I Corps, of course, and then it was Hill 55 and all around that area right there. But overall, we talked about the different things we did in Vietnam, and what resulted in my promotion to E5, and it was kind of over there we had a kind of a camaraderie where you managed to get the job done no matter who was doing it, and help where you can. And I hated the office, but I was good at it, and and that sad part is that I had to spend time in the office, but my job was to get the unit diaries done. And basically, without us, there would have been no history.
Right.
And we took this unit information from, of course, the sit reps from COM and transferred them over to the unit diary, and that's where your medals came from, your Purple Hearts, your injury reports, you name it, it was part of that system. And it's kind of unique because back then there was no computers, and it was manual typewriters even. Wow. And I seen my first electric typewriter in Vietnam finally.
Wow. And
so you look back in history where 50 years ago there was no computers, there were manual typewriters. Everything you did as far as personal administration was actually done on a 3x5 metal card where you embossed the information onto the card. Each individual had his own plate, and every time you had any information about that individual, you would emboss the name onto a unit diary and then type in what happened to the individual. Wow. And that's how they kept personnel administration going. And anyway, that part of that system was we made dog tags, we made everything. Everything we did was in like 8 copies. Everything that was a document, we had to use onion skins with carbon paper on it. Oh. And then everything you typed was 8 copies. And so we did the unit diary, of course, and then we did all the personnel administration functions, as well as keep up the service record SRBs. Right. And you made the entries into the SRBs as different operations the guys went on, where they were attached to. And so it was kind of a unique situation where I had a lot of that information, and stupid enough not to keep a copy of all the rosters and things that I did during that time. And for actually 30 years, I just forgot about Vietnam. Wow. And actually, when I got home from Vietnam, I became a policeman. And so I've been in law enforcement like 24 years, and I retired out of law enforcement. Wow. And so we ended up, different things that I'd done in Vietnam. We were talking about Craig Newberry, who was a flame tank commander at the time. I always wanted to be a crewman from the time I got to Vietnam. And the first time I heard those tanks leaving the perimeter, I said, I want part of that. Wow. And even though I was in the office, I had to do my job first, and then any free time I had, I asked to be in the tank park. And so we ended up going into the tank park, and I helped the crews as they come back in. not only with PM or cleaning weapons or unloading tanks and breaking track or torsion bars or whatever needed to be done to keep the tanks going. And I'd like to volunteer for everything, you know, between fuel trucks, ammo runs, mail call,
Right.
and in the field. I wanted to get out of the office so bad. I just wanted to help where I could, and that was my attitude. And it's kind of unique because I'm a Chinese American, half-breed. That was, my dad was full Chinese and my mom was Irish. And that was kind of like a restaurant love affair, you know. And my mom and dad were never married, but but to me, as a Chinese person going into the Orient and having the VC as our enemy, and the word "gook" was strange to me and kind of insulting to me because I'm Chinese, and I didn't know how I would be accepted against the troops. And yet, the tanks was the tightest people I've ever worked with in my life. And it was, I didn't have any problems as far as that went. But in fact, the VC themselves, or the damn Viet Cong, I remember guarding some prisoners one time, and I've forgotten about this. And so one of the last reunions, somebody reminded me that when you were guarding those guys, they were saying, "You say me same as me."
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I got rifle, you don't." And that was,
my God.
and that was one of those things that it's kind of a unique thing to be Oriental and go through this whole thing of Vietnam. But it didn't take long before you realized that this was a war going on and people were trying to kill you.
Wow.
And that, but I was the type of person that I would do anything to get the job done, and that's the attitude I had.
That's a Marine.
Yeah, exactly. It just, I remember different things that happened throughout the time there. And it was pretty strange because on top of everything, the only reason why I was a clerk typist or a clerk to begin with is I was raised by a Chinese family. And as punishment, if you did something wrong, our father made us write pages, handwrite pages out of books. And he usually took us to the encyclopedia or something and made us write these pages, and little be notes we were reading and getting knowledge that we never had any aptitude to get because we just typed these stupid pages. And I wrote a lot of pages because I was always in trouble when I was younger, and so my penmanship got so bad because I used to scribble these pages out as punishment, and so as a result I learned how to type. And so I could type 40, 50 words a minute back then, and I was good at typing, and that's how I ended up. But the Marine Corps, among other things, they said to enter a computer specialist class, I had to be 3 years active duty. I joined the Marine Corps as a Type J reservist, what they call it. And it was 2 years active service with 4 years active reserves. And so they told me, if you want this computer school, to re-enlist an extra year, and then that'll give you 3 active years and you could go to computer school. I have not seen a computer from the Marine Corps to this day. And so they goosed me for an extra year and put me into the administration, and still I was never trained for it because I had enough intelligence to know that the time was coming where computers are going to be part of the deal, and the first computers were like data processing for supplies and stuff. And so I knew that was the way to go. But they, typical Marine Corps, they ended up screwing me out of a year. They had to put an extra year in there.
Now, did you get out after that year?
I did get out after 3 years. And then when I come home, I was living with a police officer that was, his son was my best friend, just like a brother. In fact, he was the CB in Vietnam.
And whereabouts were you living?
Ogden, Utah at the time. So I've been born and raised basically in Utah all my life. And the one police officer I lived with was in Ogden, Utah, and he got me interested in law enforcement. Our made me take the test anyway. I was not interested to become a police officer at all. I just took the test just to get him off my back, but little beknownst that I passed it high enough to be in the list, and I got hired and had become a police officer. And it's all, but he was a best friend of mine, that the same best friend of mine that was a CB in the Navy, and he was in Vietnam. And from our neighborhood, there was like 5 kids that went to Vietnam altogether.
Wow.
And 3 of us had seen each other in Vietnam. I seen my best friend in Vietnam as a CB.
Really?
He was stationed at CB-9. And I was
the odds are better.
yeah,
Oh.
and I was in, of course, the Marine Corps First Tanks, and we were all right out of Hill 55 at the time. And and he met another guy that was in the Army, 3 different branches of the service, and he met 3 out of the 5 people in their neighborhood.
In your neighborhood.
Yeah, and so it
That's-
was within 66 and 67. But we did see each other. I since lost him. He died of a cancer, colon cancer, just a couple of years ago. But
Did you all go to the same high school? Or same
exactly
school?
same high school.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez.
we all went to Ogden High School, and all graduated within 2 years of each other.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of unique to
That
see
is
everybody.
unique.
Yeah. And then we ended up, like I said, I spent 2 years in Ogden City, which is the 2nd largest city in Utah at the time, with the police department there, and got trained basically there as a police officer. And then I went to Roy, which is a suburb of Ogden. And out of a 35-man police department, I ended up retiring as assistant chief.
Wow.
And so I attributed a lot of that to Vietnam, because it's this super sensitive job of what your surrounding is and what your different things are as far as what to look for, and just being aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
And it was just, you couldn't teach the new policeman that.
Exactly.
And common sense or whatever, it just goes with the job. But it was all Marine Corps for me. And being an ex-Marine, it just made it much easier just to move right into law enforcement, really.
Now, did you perform any of the functions of a tank driver? Or?
Oh, yes, I did. Like I say, Newberry was actually the tank commander of the flame tank section of our H&S company.
Right.
And Captain Gunzelman was our captain, and he decided, well, take him out there and see what he could do or what he wants to do. And so I drove, and at the same time I was a gunner for the flame tank. But I didn't have a lot of time, and that was just, I wish I had more, but I wanted to do enough to if they needed somebody to sit in the seat, I could do that.
Yeah.
And
Being
now,
a gunner, you're sitting right next to a big tank of napalm.
yeah, oh yeah. And but it was just so, I wanted to do that so bad, and to help more. And then I ended up where I finally could, and then Newberry was the tank commander that let me on there.
That's great.
And and we've been friends ever since Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And Rick Lewis, of course, was in the
That's
same.
That's the first time you saw him since Vietnam?
Exactly.
Jeez.
And I totally wiped it out.
Yeah.
And then Rick Lewis, of course, was part of that unit as well. And then we ended up to where I burned a few hedgerows and drove a couple times. and well, we lived next to a crematorium when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
And I could smell burning flesh, and it's very distinctive.
Yeah.
And one of the worst nightmares I had in Vietnam is we had a tank park accident involving napalm. And we mixed the napalm up by hand, of course, and we loaded tanks, and we were cleaning out the gun barrel, and then after we got done, they fired a shot of gas through it to clean them out. But there was a young man that had a cigarette in his mouth all the time, and he lit a smoke when he wasn't supposed to, and it burned him about, I guess, 60-70% of his body, and he fell off the tank, burning.
Yeah.
And I was there, and Newberry was there, and we knocked him down and put the flames out, and by the time we got to him, the flesh was just falling off his bones.
Good.
And to this day, me and Newberry both can't remember the name of the guy, or if he made it, how bad he was burned.
Yeah.
All we remember is knocking him down and putting the flames out and getting a sheet, cover him up, and then they medevac him. And that was the worst thing that ever happened. And that's, to this day, it just, you could just smell the flesh and see the burns. And to not know who he was, or if he made it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You know, the irony of your story is I just did an interview earlier, and one of the guys trying to track down a KIA that was mislabeled is the wrong word, but they have the wrong reason for his death on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And our guy discovered it and is trying to write that to make sure he didn't die that way, he died this way.
Right.
And he's basically out there interviewing, same thing, didn't know
Right.
the guy's name,
Yeah,
and met him all of once,
Right.
but knew the story. And
Yeah, and it was like, 30 years that I put it out of my mind, and yet, in law enforcement, you see so much death and destruction, and between the automobile accidents and the suicides and the whatever homicides, and the first thing I ever was shot at as a police officer, I remember being on the berm where rounds coming over your head, and the popping noise when they're close and the zingy noise when they're not. I literally testified in court on my first homicide case, or my first assault case involving the shooting, that they were shooting at me because exactly I knew where it was going.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I testified to as being a Vietnam veteran, is that I've been shot at before, and I know the difference between close and not.
Yeah.
And as a policeman, you always see that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's funny because all the positive experiences in Vietnam were such a help in law enforcement. I can't even tell you how much it. But that same thing. I was always the first through the door and always the last one coming out.
Yeah.
And that's just the attitude you had.
I would guess that you're that way in everything you do.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And even you talk about different stories you hear, and it was like one of my best buddies that was he'd come out of the field as a tanker, but he had malaria and a few issues that he was dealing with medically.
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Bill DeBose, and for this lifetime I can't get him to get into the unit, but I keep trying. But we one night we were playing nimbly peg in the tent, and you have to use your K-bars, of course, and so we were playing nimbly peg and went to sleep, and we had a few beers, and in the middle of the night I hear this ungodly scream, and I thought, oh God, here comes rockets. And we jump out of bed, and I hear another scream, and I said, what's up, Bill? He says, I think I just stepped into a K-bar and almost cut his toe off. And he said, get me over to the Battalion aid station. And so I flipped him on my back, and we carried him over there to the Battalion aid station, and the corpsman looked at him and said, what happened? He said, oh, he stepped in the K-bar. We were playing nimbly peg. He said, well, tell you what, you hold the toe and I'll sew it back on, and we won't say nothing. And so I'm just holding his toe, and the corpsman sewed his toe back together, and he said, well, you don't really have to say anything about it because both of you have been drinking and shouldn't be doing nimbly peg and forget your K-bar in the floor. And that's the first thing. I hadn't seen him since one of the reunions. We dropped by to Chicago and saw him and reminded him of that.
Did the toe make it?
Yeah, toe made it.
Oh.
But we had a good time. And and Newberry, the first time he got cut bad was when he was stealing the officer steaks from the steak in the mess hall.
Stealing?
Yeah, he bought a whole case of frozen steaks, and he was breaking them apart so we had to have our barbecue, and he cut his finger, and but yeah, we used to do a lot of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like I say, I went over. Well, I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, after my tech school or training school, whatever, advanced school, which is at Del Mar, right next to Tank Park.
Yeah.
And then we went from Camp Pendleton, I went to Camp Lejeune, and I was with 2nd Battalion 8th Marines, the S1, and met a real nice officer that was a warrant officer, a warrant admin officer. And he got me interested. I wanted to become maybe a warrant officer. That would be okay.
Right.
And then anyway, we had a pretty good time. I was there for about 4 months. And we were scheduled to go on a Caribbean cruise with the BLT.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other admin guys was married, and he was about ready to have a baby. And he ended up getting orders to Vietnam. And that was in '66, where they had the 2,000 man push from the 2nd Division, and everybody was going to Vietnam after that. I volunteered to go take his place so he could be with his family as a baby got.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I got to Vietnam, before like 11 months in the Corps, and I ended up over there. But volunteering again, stupid shit to do, but I did. And then when I got over there, of course, bad thing, everybody gets those Dear John letters.
Mm-hmm.
I got mine, and I had a gal that I was going to marry and turned her shit, basically. And after that, I didn't give a shit. And so I volunteered for everything.
Yeah.
And so, but I know that by doing that, I was able to get into these different parts of the things that I wanted to do. Yeah. And then so we ended up trying a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And whatever I retained, but I still had a job to do, and I did it. And then when I had free time, any free time, I would volunteer to go out in the field or into the tank park or do whatever needs to be done.
Boy.
And then
the CO must have been really happy.
he was, and we got our combat readiness inspection, or whatever they call it, and there was it was one of those ridiculous figures that on the unit diary reports, the error percentage. I think mine was like 0.0068. It's
Oh my gosh.
less than 1%.
Yeah.
And the commander recommended me for meritorious combat promotion at that time. Not only by that, but except for the other things that I was involved in doing.
Yeah.
And then plus the reactionary platoon on the as far as the perimeter and the guard assignments and just everything that whatever needed to be done. And so I made Sergeant E5 meritorious combat promotion in 23 months or 22 months really, in the Marine Corps. And I was making E5 standing next to 8-year sergeant.
Yeah.
It scared me to death, But I had a good time as far as Vietnam because people accepted me for who I was, and it didn't matter what color my skin was or what language I could speak. I speak a little Chinese over there, and I could understand a little bit of the Chinese, like the tailors and the Chinese businessmen that were there. Some of that stuff I did understand.
Yeah.
And that what scared me the first time was the first dead Chinese advisor they brought in. The son of a bitch must spit 6'1", 6'2".
Really?
Big, tall, 200 some odd pounds.
Yeah.
And they don't make our animals that way, and it just it surprised me because they brought this dead officer in, or I guess he was advisor or something. Yeah. They brought him in to show everybody, and it scared the hell out of me. That was a big individual. Yeah. And then, but we had our days. Like I said, the first time we got rocketed, and just like the old, and for the shit-fisters in the back, like we are. Yeah. Not everybody has the opportunity to do what we did, as far as volunteering to go out in the field and stuff. Yeah. And I was happy with it. I wanted to do more, and so that's why we ended up doing more. Yeah.
Well, Rick Lewis was telling me that if your tanks were down for any length of time, like, okay, we got to get a battery pack or an engine pack, and it's going to take a week and a half, they made you either reaction force grunts or perimeter grunts, or assign you to a grunt unit, send them back in 10 days. Yep. And so, literally, just like you, no matter what your MOS was or what your skill set was, sooner or later, everybody wanted you to carry a rifle or get on a tank.
Exactly, and it's just a matter of, they did. They said, that's how I met most of the crews, is through the guard assignments. When they were down, and they were assigned to guard duty and perimeter duty. There was always at least 6 guys on the main bunker with the 50 and the 60s, and it just it was surprising how many just volunteer, and information like I used to deliver the mail, and so they knew who I was, and so it was good to sit these guys down and get mail from home and just do things that made
bet
them
you were
feel
popular
better.
when you-
Oh
when you
yeah,
came around with
yeah. At Christmas time, everybody wanted some of that stuff,
Yeah.
and it just, and it was, and it, the guys that supported those tank crews, the drivers, the cooks,
Yeah.
even comm guys, and like you say, the mechanics. These guys, I feel that we haven't been left out,
Mhm.
and I don't feel that they really feel that you're not part of the organization
Oh,
as far as that goes. But I do, you do sense some of that because some of the guys were like that,
Yeah.
and there's some guys would never go out in the field if they didn't have to.
I learned a long time ago, don't piss off the guys that get the ammo to you, or get the comm to you, or get
Exactly.
the food to you.
Yeah, and like I say, at first I felt bad, and then I thought about it, and I think about history it is, and there wouldn't be a history
Yeah.
if there wasn't for guys that were doing unit diaries and sit reps for the.
How big of an organization were you keeping? I know this is all paper. and-
It was a company, and the company size was about 120,
Yeah.
120 people. Like you say,
eight pieces of paper per man, probably, or more.
exactly, and it's just a matter of, like I said, there is no computers back
Yeah.
then, and it was all hand typed, and it was all hand organized, and it was just each one of the unit diaries. Like you say, you had a 3x5 plate,
Yeah.
and you would stamp the plate, and all this information would be on the plate. And depending on what you were doing, you could have 2 lines with the name, rank, serial number only,
Right.
or you could do the 5 lines would have his entry point date, and then when he was supposed to rotate out, date of birth, blood type, everything just like your dog tags were on there.
Right.
And every information that you had, it was, they had little flags that you put on these different areas where it tells you when he rotates out, what his date of rank is.
Right.
And what his rank is, of course, and his serial number. And I, foolish enough, did not ever keep a copy of the rosters.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And that would have been phenomenal
Yeah.
to be able to say these were the guys that were with us.
Yeah.
And somewhere down the line, you think it would be somewhere.
You're right.
Yeah, the Chronicles, like I said, I looked up the Chronicles one time, and I could see my initials on some of the stuff that was
Really?
typed on the Chronicle stuff.
Yeah.
And that was kind of unique to see that.
Yeah.
It was just, well, yeah, that was me that typed that up. I don't remember typing that up,
Yeah.
but it showed the monthly activity report for
Yeah.
Goes to Battalion.
That's a big report.
Yeah.
I remember going out in
Yeah.
the Chronicles and seeing that. It's
Yeah,
A lot of data.
yeah, and
It's all hand typed in.
It's hand typed.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez.
It's, and like I say, I would have never learned how to type if I didn't have my Chinese guardian
Yeah.
that made us do those pages.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it was punishment, and
Yeah.
yet it was educational
Yeah.
as well as far as reading and doing what you need.
Yeah.
My favorite part was the National Geographics with the nude. With the African maidens
Yeah.
in there, but it was just, there were so many things I took for granted in
Yeah.
life, and it just was one of those things that we laugh about it now. Although we had 4 or 5 boys that I was raised with, and we all laugh about these pages that we had to do, and
Yeah.
yet it was because of those pages I had to learn how to type,
Yeah.
because my handwriting was so bad that in school, that when I did reports, as far as reports for school, and that I typed them out, and I
Yeah.
always got A's and B's because they were typed out.
Oh, yeah. Teacher
And-
probably loved it.
Yeah, and they were like, instead of handwritten 6-8 pages, you got two well-typed pages up, and they always got good grades in school.
Yeah.
And in fact, in in boot camp, remember that 5-0 system that they used to rate you
Yeah.
at?
Yeah.
Education, 5-0. I aced the test.
Wow.
Attitude, 3-7.
How old were you?
I was 18 when I went.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I had discipline, so I knew they were playing games.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a big deal for me. And I figured, but then when they got to our turn in our section, it was our turn to harass, then
Yeah.
that was a little different, where you got the head-on collision with the DIs. But like I say, I was a Hollywood Marine down in Camp Pendleton, and that was. all my West Coast.
Yeah.
And then I went back east to 2-8. It was just, I hated 2-8.
Yeah.
And people were different down there. There's just a little bit of
Oh, yeah.
animosity towards somebody. I don't know what, either the Marines or military something, but Jacksonville was not a good place to be.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Different part of the world.
Yeah, and it was, and it it was funny because I enjoyed coming home. I was with 5th Military Police when I come home,
Okay.
and we did all our training for riots, civil disobedience.
Well,
During that
there was a
68,
lot of-
69.
Yeah.
And when Watts burned,
Yeah.
we were on
Yeah.
6 bys as a battalion of
Yeah.
military police ready to go into Watts.
Did they ever
that-
send you in?
They never did. We
Yeah.
were loaded up and we were ready to go, but we
Yeah.
never did go in.
Wow.
But that's the kind of training that we were doing
Yeah.
when I got out in 69. And then I became a policeman shortly after that. And we ended up being in law enforcement, of course.
Mhm.
And my dad used to run a restaurant in Ogden, which is in 1949 to almost 76. And his main business venue was the trains that used to come through Ogden. It was the
Okay.
main center.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And then his restaurant was a half a block from the depot.
Yeah.
And before 66 and 65, before the integration laws and before anything, the black people would not come across the north side of the street.
Really?
And it was not segregated legally,
Yeah.
but it was just an untold story that you keep on your side of the street and everything's fine.
Yeah.
But 65, 66, they started shooting holes in our window.
Oh, wow.
And then because they would sit at our counter and we wouldn't serve them.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I never had any problems when I was in high school or schools with black people, whatever,
Yeah.
Mexicans, it don't matter. But I never even sensed that kind of prejudice.
Yeah.
And then I went to, like I say, in 66, when I went to the Marine Corps and I come back in 69, it was different.
Yeah. Things have changed.
Things are different. Yep. And then I've also seen it change in the military as well when I
Yeah.
come back. You had your black groups and your whatever, and they had their own little thing going.
Yeah.
And it was sad. It was sad. But we never sensed that in Vietnam.
Yeah.
We never
Yeah.
had any prejudicial issue. We had black, we had Mexican, we had Chinese.
Yeah.
But we worked as a team, and we
Yeah.
had a job to do, and we'll do it. We didn't care what the things were.
Yeah.
And I was proud to be a member of that organization as far as First Tanks
Yeah.
goes.
Well, you earned it.
Yeah,
You earned the respect and you
yeah,
earned the.
exactly.
And I don't think anybody ever shied, that I know of, shied away from doing something above and beyond. Nobody had, well,
Right.
I only do this.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, I had a few.
Really?
Yeah, I had a black sergeant that was admin chief when I just before I come home.
Uh-huh.
He wouldn't go out to the field for nothing.
Wow.
And like you said, he had this job to do, and that's what he did.
Yeah.
And it was sad. And I'm glad I'm going home.
Yeah.
But then when I got home in 10 of 68, I missed it by 3 weeks.
Wow.
I went home Christmas of.
You probably would have been held over, don't you think? Had you been there when?
I was pissed because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I wonder how the guys were, and it's just a matter.
That's right. You had just left.
Yeah, and I just 3 weeks before that, and then survivor's guilt was one of the things I was putting up with.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the different tank accidents and smells of diesel fuel and
Yeah.
all that. I ignored it. I didn't have any problem with it at all until I got a divorce and my emotional status just went to hell.
Yeah.
And then it ended up to where all these things started to come to a head. And as a assistant chief and as a sergeant and a lieutenant on the police department, my job was to take care of the troops. And I could do that,
Yeah.
but I couldn't take care of myself.
Yeah.
And that's when I reached out for some help.
Yeah. Good for you
yeah.
for recognizing that.
Yeah. And then my ankles are beat up from Vietnam where I jumped off a tank and twisted the ankle full. And I didn't break nothing, but it tore everything loose, and I had bad ankles ever since. They've rebuilt it twice now on
Yeah.
both my ankles and my left knee. And now I got one that's ready to be replaced, knee, but I'm not going to do it till I can't move it.
Yeah.
So. But
Well,
yeah.
I keep saying, they're getting really good at that replacement stuff. So,
Oh yeah, they are.
If I put it up a little bit longer, they'll make it painless.
Yeah, and then I got 2 months ago. I got diagnosed with diabetes too.
Oh wow.
And I don't have a history of any of that stuff. So, and I lost weight, 25 pounds in probably 2 or 3 months, and then I ended up, you're thirsty all the time, and you're pissing all the time, and you're just tired all the time, and I didn't know what it was. And one of my friends, his wife is going through breast cancer even now, and she said, you got to get tested. I think it's diabetes is what you're describing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and she had a universal tester, and I was like 500 something, and it was supposed to be around 140.
Yeah.
And found out I had diabetes. And another wonderful thing of Vietnam, possibly Agent Orange or whatever you're looking at. One of the main factors is diabetes too, and then you end up. I had psoriatic arthritis, which is a nervous disorder as well as a skin disorder.
That's Agent Orange also.
Yeah, and then I had psoriasis. I take Humira shots every 2 weeks for the psoriasis.
Oh.
And so I'm sticking myself like a pincushion every day. And for what these guys went through, I look at it now, and I went on as a reservist. I stayed with the reserves for the Army Reserve for 9 years, and then I went to the Air Force Reserves and retired from the reserve because it was a law enforcement position. I retired as a E8 senior master sergeant as a law enforcement superintendent.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I actually retired from the reserve unit, so I have a military retirement and insurance, so I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But
you earned that.
Yeah, and then Desert Storm, Desert Shield, I went active duty for 65 days.
Did you really?
Yeah. And then I was the second team that was going to go out with the Air Force here at Air Force Base in Utah. Their squadron was going to go into Kuwait. And then my son, who is also in the reserves, was a mechanic for F-16 fuel systems.
Okay.
And we both were on 24-hour standby, ready to go on the next set of 40-man teams that were scheduled to go into Kuwait. But
You
the
think
war.
you both would have gone?
I thought we were ready. I was ready, and we got all the equipment to go. But 10 days later, the war was over.
Oh, that's right.
And so, so that was Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would have been in Desert Storm as well. But I was ready to go. I was hoping I could go first, so my son didn't have to be in.
I was going to say they wouldn't send both of you.
No, but we were both on standby. So, and I said, well, what's another role? Shit.
Well, you must have been a good old shit because they're not just going to send anybody.
No, we were 45. We were ready. But so I had a very fruitful career, and then like I say, I retired from law enforcement after 24 years.
Yeah.
But it was my experience as a Marine and as a Marine NCO that gave me that leadership capability to do what I needed to do. And to this day, I'm just glad of it.
Yeah, I think it's a foundation that we get.
It really is.
You never lose.
You never do. And and then like one of the reunions back, we said how many police officers ended up out there in our reunion, and there was quite a few police officers out there, and that's where people remember me from is that policeman from Utah.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's only like 2 or 3 members from Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not many of us.
Amazing. Well, Joe, that's a great story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. And it's always so rewarding to me to sit here and talk to somebody and to find somebody that said, "We need something done, I'll do it. Put me on it."
Beautiful.
If we need you to go, no, well, I'll go after I'm done with the office.
Yeah.
That's just what we need. We need that right now in this country.
It does, and there's not enough of them.
Yeah.
And like even law enforcement today, it's a total different law enforcement from when I was in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I've been retired almost 20 years. They bought my position out to where I retired early because they paid me to go, and then but the wages between a new captain and a captain of 20 years makes the difference of what their budgets could handle.
Yeah.
And then yet today it seems like they can't make a decision on their own.
Oh,
Common sense, none. As far as well, the captain told me to do it, or the sergeant told me to do it.
Yeah.
Not because they did it on their own, but because they're afraid to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And it just it ties their hands.
Yeah.
And then you have all this other issues going on that is.
I'm glad we are in our stage of life cycle.
Oh, yeah,
that we're in.
yeah,
I hate to
exactly.
be 25 years.
Yeah, are your grandkids?
Yeah.
Are
Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
and what is it going to be like with them? You
Yeah.
know, technology has gone so crazy, and it just, well, even like we talked about, when we sat in that M48 tank, we thought we were in Cadillac.
Exactly.
And the first M60 I seen was even later than that, and I never seen an M60 except in a park, you know.
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, weren't you guys?" No, we wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, we were just lucky to have the diesel pack in there.
Yeah.
We had only 2 Cadillac engines in there,
Yeah.
and but then we, of course, Seattle, we come up to that M1, and
Yeah.
it's just totally just crazy.
Yeah.
And then we think about World War II
Oh, yeah.
and what they went through,
Yeah.
or even the aircraft in World War II. Now they got stealth.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah,
I
it
love
is.
it. Well, I'm a warmonger. I love it though. Republican.
Well, there's times you got to do that in this life.